plug you in if you're interested. Since there's no clergy in the Baha'i Faith, there's also no like Sunday morning church, for instance. This is a gathering. There's about almost 600 Baha'is in the rolls in Austin. And the thing that would be kind of the equivalent to church happens once every 19 days, and that's at night. And so this is just a space for us to get together and have devotions, praise God, and then have a conversation about religious truths. Oftentimes, the person who kind of facilitates that conversation is a Baha'i. Today, we're very fortunate to have a gentleman who's not a Baha'i, Kelvin, and his area of specialty is the afterlife. And he's got a great website with a ton of information, and he's got some books here today if you're curious to find out more information afterwards. But, you know, one of the principles of the Baha'i Faith is the oneness of religion and independent investigation of the truth. So sharing this space with somebody else who can share his insights is a real treat for all of us. So thank you.
Thank you, Brian. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. What I want to do today is cover this idea of overcoming the fear of death from a bunch of different perspectives. Okay, you'll see that when I talk about this, and I'll tell you a little bit about my background, history, and so forth, but I like to come at it from different angles because we're all different, right? And everybody has, even if we have a similar faith, we all think about even the faith differently. And so I like to come at things from different ideas to try to give people different approaches and perspectives that hopefully each individual can then walk away from and say, okay, I look at it that way, or I look at it this way, and that helps me in this way, right? So I try to tailor things even to large audiences of hundreds and maybe even thousands of people in a way that that one person who is I'm talking to figuratively or literally can take something that's practical and can help them in their life. So that's kind of 100,000-foot view from where perspective that I come from all of this. And so I wrote this book about a year ago. It came out about 6 months ago, and I brought several copies if people are interested afterwards. And what inspired me to write the book, and I'll tell you a bit about what inspired me to get into this whole area of talking and helping people with death and dying, were basically two points, two sources of the book in a sense. One is that my mom passed away when I was pretty young. So when I was in school, my mom passed away very suddenly. And she was, especially in today's times, she was relatively young. She was about 50 years old. And she died very suddenly. She had an illness, and the cancer had advanced so fast through her that she was asymptomatic, meaning no symptoms, no nothing. 1 minute, it was almost like, like a car accident kind of, or one of these horrific things where somebody's there and you see them in the morning and you don't see them when they come home from school or work in the afternoon. It was almost like that. And so the point is, personally, it psycho-emotionally really shook me, and even though there was some time when we knew she was going to pass, when somebody goes, they go, and you miss them. And even if you believe in an afterlife, you're not with them now. They're not with you then, right? And so there's that reality that hits you. And so it got me thinking about this. And so that's one of the points, sources of my work generally, and the book specifically. And I started talking to people. So I was in school, I started talking to people, and you know how people say, well, how are you doing? And usually we just say, oh, yeah, I'm doing okay, I'm doing fine, or I'm doing great, or whatever, even if you're not. Because you don't want to get into a whole litany, a whole detailed discussion, or maybe you're busy, or who knows, for whatever reason. But I started mentioning it to people, not in any detail, but I just said, oh, I'm okay, but my mom just passed away. And then people start telling you stuff. You know how that happens? Mm-hmm. You disclose a little bit, and then boom, it's like, wow. People just tell you things that there's a story in my book of a friend of mine, and I won't get into the details of the story unless we get into it in a discussion later, perhaps. But I worked with this guy for several years, and we lived in the same town, and we would carpool sometimes to work. He never told me until recently. I mean, we worked together 15 years ago. And he didn't tell me till he heard I was writing the book about this story about himself and his brother who died, and so forth and so on. So, you say something to people, and then boom, people open up. They tell you stuff. And so what I started noticing, and this is the second reason for the book, is that when people started talking to me about their experiences with losing a loved one, or their own personal experiences with maybe their own illness or their own fears of death and dying, even if they were healthy, often people would default, understandably, to either religious or cultural beliefs that they have. And that makes sense, it's logical. But what I also noticed was they would get into disagreements. If there was multiple people among us, in the group, people would get into different disagreements. Even people from the same faith would get into disagreements. Buddhists don't agree amongst Buddhists about Buddhism, So there's this wide range of different beliefs. And so I thought, over the decades now, I thought, how can we talk more about death and dying in a more open fashion without getting bogged down, so to speak, in these little disagreements that people have about little details and so forth, that to me diverts us. It takes our attention away from really talking about the the death, the dying process, and so forth. And it's almost like a good excuse to not talk about it, because we don't want to go there. We don't want to get into disagreement. So I came up with these 4 beliefs, and so that's the title. The full title of my book is "Overcoming the Fear of Death Through the 4 Main Belief Systems." Through each of the 4 main belief systems. So here are the 4 beliefs. The first belief, and by the way, these beliefs, they basically underlie all the religious and cultural beliefs in the world. Somewhere fits somewhere here. So the first belief is my dad's belief system about death. He had a science background and so forth. So very often, it is sometimes in literature referred to as the physical science belief about death. So that's where the belief is that the mind and the body are connected. And when the body dies, the mind shuts off, because your brain, the thinking is that your brain, that's where your mind comes from. All your thinking comes from your brain, and all your experience comes from your brain, and when the body dies, the brain dies, the mind shuts off. That's the first belief system, okay? The second belief system that I came up with, I describe as the fear of continued existence. So that's when people believe in an afterlife, but there's some fear there. And I don't get into this in my first book, but there are many, I kind of lightly touch on why people might be fearful, but I'm mainly dealing in my first book about how do you deal with the fear, and how do you reduce the fear and overcome the fear. In my second book, I'm going to get into more details about the various fears that people have. But people can have all sorts of fears, right? And the general one, of course, is the fear of uncertainty, not knowing exactly what's going to happen. But even if you believe in afterlife. So that's the second belief system, fear of continued existence. Third belief system is afterlife, belief in afterlife. Mind will continue, in other words, after the body dies, that's that belief. But no fear. So that's the third belief system. And then the fourth belief system is mind continues after the body dies, and the mind is conscious, makes decisions, and can choose to come back in another body. So another lifetime. Reincarnation, sometimes people refer to that, past lives, future lives, and so forth. So that's the fourth belief system, and a huge percentage of the population of the world believes in the fourth belief system. In my research, I was interested. I was a little bit surprised. I didn't know what the number was, but in the United States, it's somewhere around, depending on which study you look at and so forth, it's somewhere around 15 to 20%. It's much higher than I would have expected. But it ranges anywhere in the world, depending what country you're talking about, from about 10 or 12% to 44% of that particular country's population. So, but that's the fourth belief system. So those are the four belief systems. Now, some people may have a hybrid. They think they have the first belief system, but they may have a little bit of a second belief system too. You know, and I'll give you an example of one that comes up a lot with me. I've worked with people from 20 different countries now over the last 30 years, especially with the internet, because they Google fear of death, and I'm one of the top search results on the internet. So, and we're talking all ages. I mean, a lot of millennials. You'd be surprised. I was surprised. 17 years old, 18 years old, 20 years old, 25 years old. Nobody ill in their family. Nobody has died in their life experience this lifetime, and yet paralyzed with the fear of death. So, so there's this range. But one is one very common way people describe a fear is they say, I'm not afraid of death. I'm afraid of non-existence after I die. And I said, well, okay, but before we go there, tell me what your belief system is about death and dying, when you do die and so forth. Because I always, my whole thing is, I'm not here to persuade people to believe the way I do. You can connect the dots when you read my book and kind of figure out like what my belief system is, but that's not the point. My point is to try to help people look through their belief system in maybe in a slightly different way that helps them reduce and hopefully eliminate their fear of death. Because fear, let's define fear first, and I'll come back to this fear of non-existence issue. Fear is the emotion caused by the anticipation of unhappiness, right? The emotion caused by the anticipation of unhappiness is how I define fear. Now, back to the fear of non-existence, very often people will say, I have the first belief system, because I'm trying to figure out what their belief is and help them clarify, look through their belief lens and reduce their fear. So I always ask them, very often they'll say they have the first belief system, but they have the fear of non-existence. So the first thing I do with people is say, okay, let's look at that. Does it make sense, first of all, do you really have the first belief system? If you really do have the first belief system, remember which is the physical science belief, the belief that the mind and the body are connected and one life, that's it, no afterlife. That's the first belief system. So I say, okay, if you really believe that, and I'm kind of saying this to you in case you know people like this, they should have absolutely no fear of death, because the fear is what I say, it's the emotion caused by the anticipation of unhappiness. Well, if you believe that your mind is going to die when your body dies, you have one life, you should live your life fully. Somebody said this morning in the devotions we were reading, right? Living your life fully in the present, right? That should be your life purpose, your objective in life, because you believe that your mind is going to die when your body dies. Therefore, you have no fear of death. Death is meaningless for you if you have the first belief system, okay? So, people will often say they have the first belief system, but I have a fear of continued existence. So the first thing I point out to them is, you don't solely have the first belief system. You have at least some, or maybe all, of the second belief system, the fear of continued existence. Now, you may not be sure whether you're going to continue and have an afterlife, and I always say, that's okay, because nobody's really going to know till they know. You're either, the light is going to, it's binary, right? One of two things is going to happen when we die. Either the light's going to be on or it's not going to be on, right? Right? The mind, the light, you know, somebody's going to be home or nobody's going to be home. It's one of two things is going to happen. And so if there's nobody home and the light turns off, it's a non-issue, right? The whole issue is taken off the table. This whole fear of death thing is completely taken off the table. Now, if the mind continues after we die, so I'm here to help, in a sense, people deal with the first belief system, which is the easy one to deal with, in a sense. But all the other belief systems, what's that mean? That means that we should prepare. The way I look at it we're here now, we should prepare our minds. If we have the second, third, or fourth belief system, doesn't matter. This is the now. This is the present. We should prepare our minds now for whatever the that is going to be. The that is going to be, right? And again, how different people define afterlife will be different for different people too, right? And I would argue, and we can get into this in our discussion session at the end of the, I'm going to talk for a little bit, but I want to leave a whole bunch of time to hear what your questions and curiosities are about this, because we can talk about the experience of the afterlife as well. You know, you have the concept, you have people's belief about it, and then there are experiences that people have had. And we can talk about that and what my experiences and so forth with it have been. So, but that's kind of the overview of how I frame things with people, and then I work with people differently and individually within that framework. You know, because fear contracts us. Fear is something which limits life. It limits our living of life. You know, it's the proverbial elephant in the room, isn't it? It's the thing that people generally walk away from, they don't want to talk about. And so that's why I came up with these 4 belief systems. So here's a way that we can look through these different lenses and in maybe a less intimidating way, open up conversation with people about death and dying and try to find out where people are at. Because I think the more we talk about it, the more we release the pressure valve, so to speak. You're boiling water, you want to have a release valve there. And so many people are walking around, and what's their default in our culture? And we all see this, because if anybody ever here watched TV, you know that when you see TV, what are they promoting in the ads? It's all about consumption. And it's not just about buying the things, it's the whole implication, and sometimes not implicit, sometimes it's explicit, is that that's going to buy you happiness. It's going to get you happiness. And somebody read this today, I think, in one of the devotions as well, referenced something about, and it's not that materiality, I think, is a bad thing. This is material. This is not a bad thing. It's important to be focused in material and not bump into podiums and walls and get into car accidents. And there's a certain amount of focus and materiality that's around that. But the idea of identifying, I think this is what the person was getting at, the underlying message of what they were reading this morning, is that the identification of who we are with what we own, that's not who we are. We are not our things, and that does not create lasting happiness in us, because those things can go away, and then we're unhappy. And so it's from the inside out, I call it, right? So we need to work from the inside out. A friend of mine, I've been teaching meditation for almost 50 years now, and I've taught thousands of people meditation, non-religious, non-cultural based, religious, non-religious meditation technique. And a friend of mine, when we were teaching back in the 1970s, he came up with, he's a philosophy professor now, and you'll see why when I describe to you, he came up with this model of describing this abstract thing that we're just talking about, this consumption, this who we are and how we identify ourselves and all of that. He came up with a very simple model that I talk about in my book, and he called it the conscious of XYZ model. And the idea is that the XYZs of life are all the things, and it doesn't have to just be things that we buy, but it's also they're things that we think even. Thinking is a thing in a sense. It's an object of experience. It's something that's identifiable. This is where his philosophical thing kind of starts coming in. But it's identifiable. That's the idea. But what we forget is, in order to have experience at all of the XYZs of life, we have to have the conscious side as well. So that's what we call consciousness or the mind or awareness or whatever word you want to put in there. But I tend to use the word mind. You could use the word soul. I tend to use the word mind because it's less charged with various cultural stuff. But I don't just mean the supermarket aisle mind, I sometimes call it. I don't just mean that, you know, the supermarket aisle mind where you're walking down the supermarket aisle and you're thinking, oh, I gotta get peanut butter, I gotta get I gotta get bread, do I need the apples? You know, the decision-making part of our mind is part of our mind, but there's a lot other parts of our mind, is my point, when I say mind. So I'm defining mind in the biggest sense that you could possibly define it. So if you want to use soul, you could use that, but I just tend to use the word mind. But his point was, you have to have that conscious side in order to have experience. People forget that. They identify with what? They identify themselves with the XYZs of life. They should be identifying themselves with the conscious side, the mind side, the who am I side. It's the inner side. The XYZ is the outer. So it's the inner, the outer. It's the material. It's the more abstract. The two polar opposites in a sense, right? So that's what somebody was referring to, I believe, in one of the devotions this morning that you read. And so that whole notion, I think, when we project our identity so far outside of ourselves like that, it promotes fear, doesn't it? Because that we know that this is so uncertain. You don't know what's going to happen. It's so uncertain. Everything's uncertain. The economy's uncertain. Politics is uncertain. Our friend's life is uncertain. Our children's, what's going to happen with our children? All of that is uncertain. So where does the strength and the stability need to come from? Inside. And this was throughout all of the devotions this morning, right? So that's the thing. But the key is, I always point out, so how do you do that? That's the thing. It's that everybody, I described that, what I just described as the B. How do you get from point A to point B, though? Right? Everybody understands that the point B is a great place, and that's where we should be. And we have inner peace and stability and contentment and all of that. But how do you get from point A to point B? That's the critical thing. So that's what I work with people to do. So I have a technique that I teach them and so forth. It's almost like you know what the fight or flight response is? People have heard of this. You know, it's the adrenaline pumps. It's the proverbial 200,000 year winter. 200,000 years ago, the saber-toothed tiger's at the cave door. And you either run or you fight the animal. And it's a survival thing, right? And it's not bad. It's a good thing. But it's supposed to be temporary. It's supposed to turn on for about 20 minutes, maybe a half an hour, and it shuts off. Or 5 minutes, and then it shuts off. Doesn't happen in our world like that anymore, does it? We get triggered all the time. The fight or flight turns on, the adrenaline pumps, the cortisol goes into our bloodstream. All these myriads, tens and tens and tens, 20s, 30 different hormones start pumping into our system. Our heart races. The blood goes to our big muscles, which it should, because we're going to run or we're going to fight, and we get really focused. And yet it happens when we're standing in a long line at the supermarket, right? When it shouldn't get turned on. And it gets turned on too much, and what happens is, then it gets stored in our brain, in our physical brain, the chemicals get stored in our brain. It gets stored in our tissue, in our muscles, in our cells. It literally gets stored there, and it sits there. And then when somebody cuts us off at a traffic light, boom, it's right there. It's already in our system. It's already in our muscles. And boom, we have a fight or flight again. And so all of that just creates more and more of this fear and anxiety. And then when we get so exhausted, we get depressed. And we have all of these symptoms of stress that occur in our world culture. And this is worldwide. I'm telling you, I've talked with Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, Christians, Jews, every religion in the world. People have called me, and everybody's afflicted with the same thing. And so part of what I do is help them understand through the lens that we just talked about, the different belief system that they have, and clarify things, because a lot of times people are confusing things, and they're saying, oh, I think this, and I said, well, okay, let's think about it this way a little bit, and think about it that way. But the other thing is physically. We have to clean up our nervous system so that all of these extra hormones and our blood chemistry and our tissues isn't getting triggered all the time. And as long as we have it all stored up in our muscles and in our brain tissue, it's going to get triggered. And so we have to find some way to turn on the opposite of the fight or flight switch regularly in our nervous systems. And that's what everybody needs to do to really balance. It's about balancing, because uncertainty is inevitable, always in life, but it's about balancing so that we're not triggered. That's the issue. All of this extra negative stuff isn't triggered, so we're balanced enough. So that's really what we, on planet Earth, everybody's looking for, is that level of contentment, that level of inner peace, or stability, or self-confidence, or however you want to frame it, that you can deal with whatever. And so back to the fear of death issue, that's what I'm trying to do, help people do, is so that at that moment, when that person dies, when you die, I will have considered my job well done if you're at that moment and you're like, okay, I'm okay with it, whatever's gonna happen next. You know, that's the critical thing. And so, but again, back to the point when somebody was back there nodding her head, it's like, it's about now. It's about getting ourselves into that place now. So why, just like somebody said again, another person read this in the devotions this morning, it's about living life fully, right? Fully in the present. That's the thing. So it's ironic in the sense that my work is focused around fear of death to help people live more fully in the present, because fear takes us out of that. Puts us someplace else, right? Questions? Yes.
Well, those who don't fear that they're going to be annihilated, but fear death itself, how it feels, you know, pain or whatever.
Right, the pain and suffering in the process of dying. Yes, so that's a good question. So she said, what about people who don't fear death, but they fear the process of dying? So it's a good question, because it doesn't matter which of the four beliefs you have, you could have that fear, right? You could believe in reincarnation and still have a fear of the process of dying, worrying about pain and suffering before you die, right? So, thank you very much. And here's the thing with that. So I get into that more in my second book, but I'll tell you a little preview of Coming Attractive. So here's what I have to say in a nutshell about that. The fear of pain and suffering. So I think the first step in dealing with the fear of pain and suffering is an understanding that the mind and the body are different from each other, and they're separate from each other, okay? So, and the first obvious example that everybody experiences every day is when you go to sleep at night and you dream, your body is there, your mind's doing all kinds of stuff, right? And you know, flowers are turning into elephants, and you're flying, you're maybe swimming underwater, you're seeing people who you're like, first of all, you're seeing people who you haven't seen in years, or maybe you're seeing people you don't like, who is that? I have no idea. I don't recognize them from this lifetime. You know, all kinds of, so that's the mind, and the body is lying in bed, right? You do experiments, you know, take a picture of yourself, you know, video, you know, I'm lying in bed, but my mind will experience all that. Everybody has that experience. Mind and the body are distinct, okay? That's number one step. The second thing to realize from an understanding point is and to remember, because as soon as I say this, everybody goes, oh yeah, that's right, is that you remember when we were little kids. And some of us are still little kids here, bless you. And you know when you go running through the woods, and if Chris is running in front of me, my friend Chris here is running in front of me, and we're 6 years old, and we're having a ball, we're having fun, and Chris is running in front of me, and he pushes this branch out of the way in the woods, and boom, it comes and snaps back and hits me in the face, and maybe even cuts me, and I'm bleeding, right? I mean, it really hits me. I have a choice, and what's the choice that kids usually make? They keep playing, right? And then you come home, and then the mom or the dad looks at them, and what happened to you? You're bleeding, and you don't even know. It's now crusty and whatever. Blood is dried up. Because you make a choice. We do this all the time. And you see it in sports. Texas, we're in Texas now. Football, hello. But any sport. But it's, there's a phrase for it. It's called playing through the pain. There's a choice that the mind can make. Now, I'm not saying that the mind can do anything and create a new limb or whatever. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm saying that we do make these choices. And so to reduce our fear about the pain and suffering, I point these things out so that it's just to point out that not necessarily you maybe have no pain, but you have more control over how much pain you're going to experience than you realize. And the other example that many of us have probably experienced, or we certainly have heard stories about this happening, where somebody is dying, maybe they're in the hospital, let's just say for the sake of the story, and as the story goes, the doctor says to the family, if anybody needs to come and say goodbye, now is the time, right? And then we go on the phone, boom, and the daughter who is in Europe or whatever and gets on a plane, gets hung up in a snowstorm in Chicago and misses a connecting flight or something, and the dying person holds on. How many times have we heard that, right?
Yeah.
And they could be to their great physical, perhaps, detriment in terms of their own pain that they're experiencing, because that desire that they have supersedes it, right? They hold on. The person comes, boom, they let go. Doesn't always happen, but we see it so many times, and we hear so many stories of it happening. 80% of the time, 90% of the time it happens. And it's just a sign, another signal, I think, another piece of point of evidence that the mind is more powerful than we realize. So I point these things out, again, not to say that you may have no pain when you're dying. We cannot predict that. But you will always, you can, if you choose, to always have more control over how much that causes you suffering. All right? Yes?
This isn't just my opinion or my understanding. I hope I can be able to explain it. For me, to go through, not to have the fear is that I always think that about the messenger of God from the beginning up to here. Their being or their character is so powerful that not millions, billions are believing on them, on their words. It guides their life and then gives them comfort, and they always talk about the word after this, about the death is a good thing, we are going to go to the next step, and then it is okay, everybody passes. So it gives me comfort because there is no other passengers that they don't talk about the messengers. About
and it gives you some comfort. Gives you some comfort.
Gives me the comfort because what they said guided billions of people.
Yes.
This is the one also they said there is a next step.
Yes.
And it's a good one.
Yes. Yes. So the next step is a good one. So she was talking about messengers of God, or messages from the other side, or however you want to describe it, doesn't matter. But they have this, the message is definitely that it is pleasant, that it is not a place of suffering. And that's the message
And
that
mostly
keeps
the
coming back.
result that we get to that point is if we serve the humanity here.
Yeah.
If we are a good person, we are a positive person, we have positive energy to the others.
Yes. I talk about this some in my book. I talk about some experiences that people have described. So I'll tell you one of them, and I'll shorten it a little bit just for sake of discussion here, because I want to hear more questions from you folks. So a friend of mine died for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. So people have heard of NDEs, near-death experiences. You know that acronym, NDEs. So there are tens of thousands of these are documented cases, and it happens many, many, many times, and they're documented because they're in very often, not always, but often happens in hospitals where they're measuring everything and so forth, and they're literally documenting everything. This happened, but very often they're short, 30 seconds, a minute, 3-4 minutes, which is still a long time. I'm not downplaying that. But my friend died for 20 minutes. He was clinically dead for 20 minutes, no breathing, no nothing, 20 minutes, in a hospital. So the doctors were all there. He had already coded, where they all run in, and there were 8 to 10 nurses, doctors and nurses ran into the room, and they do the adrenaline, and they do the paddles on the chest that you've seen in all the movies and TV shows and so on, all of that. They did all that. Nothing worked. And another good friend of mine, Diane, was sitting next to him, next to his bedside, through the whole thing. And so in my book, I get into several pages of detail about this experience, and from her perspective, and then from his perspective. And then I've also talked to his doctor since, his personal doctor in Seattle, Washington. This all happened in Seattle, Washington. So I have like 3 different perspectives on this one thing, where he died for 20 minutes. So if you look this up in any of the medical research and the medical websites, and I cite the National Institute for Health in my book, what they say, usually it's 4 to 6 minutes, death occurs in 4 to 6 minutes, definite brain damage after 6 to 8 minutes or so, for sure, somewhere within that range. You're gonna come back with brain damage. So my friend Jay, dead for 20 minutes, none of that. In fact, all his allergies were gone when he came back. And he'd been diabetic since he was 11 years old. This happened when he was 50 or 51 years old or something like that. But anyway, so what happened with him, in a nutshell, he went out to this place, he didn't know where, but he was in like outer space as if. So he didn't go to where I'm going to describe to you in a second further what you're talking about. He kind of went halfway, so to speak, we'll just call it. And he's out in outer space, said there's no more stars than he could ever see on the darkest night he's ever been on planet Earth. And he felt incredibly peaceful. That's the thing. He was completely felt at peace. He felt surrounded as if by some loving feeling or whatever. He felt really good. And he didn't experience a tunnel. So, and I use this as an example because sometimes people do, sometimes people don't. People have different experiences. There's a range here. It's not always this way, And so he didn't experience any tunnel going on. He's just like, boom, there he was there. And then he heard some nice music or something. He wasn't sure what. And Diane was sitting next to his bed singing a song that they both knew. Now what's interesting is that he didn't recognize it. But it's something they both knew, and that's why she was singing it. But, and she had a message while she's sitting there that she was getting information from the other side. That he's coming back, don't worry, he's coming back. Don't let them, at one point the doctors were doing, how they do this, like what's the official time of death? Let's coordinate what time do you have? They do that, and then they record that. They always do that. So she heard them do that, and then she said he just moved. And just to kind of interrupt everything, she said that because she's hearing from the other side. Here's, he's coming, so buy some time, basically, is what she's getting. And then at one point, a chaplain, the hospital chaplain came in and started saying to him, she said, thank you, I'm fine, I'm a chaplain. That just shut that person off, because so she could stay focused on what she wanted to be present to hear what she was being instructed to do, basically, and also to be there for Jay. So she started singing the song. He's out there. He starts hearing this. He doesn't recognize it, which is interesting. And he started. But as soon as he started liking, he liked it, and his mind went boom back towards the song. He's in the middle of space somewhere. He said it just felt like no planets or any, just in the middle of space, but he saw like stars and a star field, and really dense. But then he started going down a tunnel, and it was kind of like, he didn't say this to me, but the way he described it to me, it was like you go to one of these water parks, and you're in one of those tubes, and you're just the tube, and the water's whooshing you down really fast. And he saw people on both sides of him, and that's, he wasn't in a tube, but that's how he had relative motion, if you know what that is. He knew how fast he was going because they were stationary, just kind of in space. And he said they had long robes and so forth, and all these faces, and people, it was kind of like, I would describe it, this is Kelvin Chin's interpretation now, it's like there were these minds who are there in this interim space, and they're kind of comforting in a sense, but they were like, whoa, check this out, look at this guy Jay, and everybody kind of gathers around on both sides, and it's kind of like, whoa, let's watch the show. It was kind of like that. So then what happens, he said he felt like he slammed into, his mind, his soul, whatever, slammed into his body in the hospital bed so hard, he felt like this is the only way I could describe it. Felt like his mind slammed into his body. He sat right up in bed. All the doctors and nurses screamed, of course, because he'd been dead for 20 minutes. 20 minutes, that's a long time. And they screamed, and then he started yelling. He said, Diane, who are these people, and where am I, and what are they doing? And, he said, and the thing is, what's really funny about that is Jay is not, that's not his person. He's kind of a quiet guy, He's like, his personality, it kind of didn't match his usual personality. And then he looked, and I'll tell you what I don't get into in my book too much, but we're here at the Baha'i Center here, so I'm going to share something with you that I don't talk about in the book. You'll see when you read this little passage in my book, because I'm trying to keep the book not so religious, different people have different views, etc. I'm trying to keep it in that vein. But what he saw behind Diane, so Diane's now sitting there, and he sat right up. He yells that out, and he looks over behind Diane, and there's this gold light behind Diane with somebody standing there who's very tall behind Diane, with his or her arms out, and really bright. And he drew pictures of this immediately. He asked for pencil and paper, whatever pens, I don't know what, and he drew pictures of this. And every person who came in to check on him, she said, he just described his whole experience and what he saw and all this whole thing. So you draw your own interpretation from that. I let people draw their own interpretations from these things. I'm like the communicator of information, so to speak, and perspective. To your point, right? Yes.
One of the things that you said just hit me.
Yeah.
And that was back at the beginning. You were talking about the point.
Yes.
And making a decision. That was exactly what I heard at about a 4-5 insight meditation workshop. And the monk, when we reached the end, we're saying goodbye to each other, he said, hold this. And then when you come to this point, you can make a decision.
Yes.
And the rest, the other thing, this fear of the pain.
Yes.
Once we get out of allopathic medicine, there are so many ways to deal with pain that we don't have to be afraid. afraid anymore.
Right.
But as long as we're stuck with a drug mentality, and they don't really understand how the body works,
They're symptom-oriented, mostly, yeah.
they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
My father was in the hospital, I couldn't even take a water bottle to him.
Sure. I have friends who are doctors, who are physicians, who are medical doctors, who are allopaths,
Yeah.
what you're calling allopaths, which are the physicians, the MDs.
Yeah.
Yep. And they'll tell you that, you know, they're dealing with this symptoms very often. You know, it's tough. Yes, Chris.
I think there's a distinct group in terms of the you know, belief systems, is that of really chronic ambivalence in terms of whether there's an afterlife, whether there isn't. They could actually vacillate between all four systems of belief. And I've met people like this that, you know, they are chronically ambivalent. I don't know if you've thought about that particular group, distinct group.
Sure.
And some of them are agnostic, for example.
Right. Absolutely, yeah.
You know, and vacillate.
Yeah, so the point that he was raising is, if you didn't hear, Chris was mentioning that there's people who are chronically ambivalent in terms of the four beliefs. They vacillate, or they just don't really know where they fit. And they may be agnostic or maybe atheist or whatever. By the way, let me just make a quick comment on that, and I'll come back to your first one, is that you could be agnostic and atheist and have any of those belief systems, quite frankly. You know. So, first of all, but I've run into that many times. People who aren't sure, or they're ambivalent, or whatever. And my thing is, I don't really care, you know, because my objective is to help them reduce, hopefully overcome and eliminate their fear of death and dying, so that they can live more in the present. They will continue, or not, in this case, sometimes not, to think about this and where they may fit in there. And they may continue to not even think about it. That's okay. And I have run into people, and people have reached out to me, and they're exactly what you just described, Chris. And yet I help them reduce their fear so that they can deal with, they're not walking around anxiety-ridden, and they can live their life. Because everybody's, and beliefs can change too, I tell people. You know, hey, I'm not here to persuade you to change your belief, but here's the different belief systems, and just by talking about these different stories and stuff, I tell a lot of stories in here, that may make somebody go, whoa, really? That kid had a G.I. Joe doll named after 3 of the people he met in heaven before he was born, and he's 2.5 years old telling his mom this? And their hair matches what their hair was in 1942, and it's 2010 now, after his father researches. I tell this story. There's these documented stories like that. There's 3,000 of them at the University of Virginia Medical School. They have a whole department that collects this and researches this stuff since 1961 or 67, depending on, you know, Ian Stevenson, who's a doctor, started his work in 61, but he started the department in 67. But, you know, that kind of thing. Matching hair color, matching names of the 3, and his G.I. Joe dolls in 2010 are named after these 3 guys who he said met him in heaven before he was born, and who died before he died when he died in 1942. And now he's come back in 2010. How do you explain that? And this was to a Christian fundamentalist father. Mother was a little bit more open-minded Christian. But the father, fundamentalist Christian, did not. And his father just said he's still a devout Christian in the same way he was, but he has to love his son, and he knows his son isn't making this up. He never told him any of this stuff. Anyway, short answer is yes, but yeah, it's interesting. Yes, yes.
So, this was just, I guess, a comment. I don't know.
Oh, sure.
That's
okay.
So for me, I'm thinking, sure, you know, I want to live in the present for practical reasons. I cannot live in the future.
Yep.
But also, and there are people that obsess about death, dying in the afterlife. But it doesn't have to really be one or the other. In effect, they're complementary of each other. Because if I'm going to plan, let's say, a trip to the beach, I need to think about the time in the future where I'm going to be at the beach so I can plan for it. What am I going to wear? How am I going to protect my skin? Who's going to be with me? How long I'm going to be there? What else do I need to bring with me? So in effect, thinking, pondering, reflecting, where I'm going to be in the afterlife is actually a guiding light, though I'm living in the present.
Sure.
Because one without the other, it would be a purposeless life.
Yes.
Regardless of whether I believe that the light will be on or off.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. So I agree with you. I mean, I think thinking about things, which is what I do a lot of, you can tell. Thinking about things, I think, is a good thing. And that's the other thing that I encourage, is thinking. Because so many people are not thinking. They're just either reacting or they're just following what somebody else says and not thinking about it for themselves, so they really don't own it. They don't really understand it, for sure. They just take it at face value. And so I encourage people to think. So I'm all with you on that. But it's the, and you're right, we all do live in the continual present, you know, but that's the reality. But emotionally, I think, what happens sometimes is people get emotionally attached almost to what I call like beyond the imagination horizon. You know, we have our imagination between here and there. That's the present. But beyond that horizon, so to speak, if you emotionally get over there, then that's when you start getting really feeling uncentered, you know, and it can lead to a lot of unhappiness.
So there's so many things that happen in life, and we can't control what happens, but we can control how we respond.
Yes.
I agree so much with Linda Lee. I've witnessed my parents dying. They weren't people of faith, even though they had organized religion put on them, because they, the time and the era that they grew up, being Native American, forced to conform to be accepted by religion, just survival.
Right.
And so I'm just, as a child, I felt like I was an old spirit with a lot of knowledge. So I don't have the fear. I walk by faith.
Yeah.
And I'm just so thankful that I'm God's daughter, and I have so much comfort and peace in that. My parents both fought their deaths. Fought to what I witnessed. Just had such an impact. It became manic. Just procrastination became a big emergency beyond, you know. And so with my mother, even though she had organized religion even beat into her, I was able to get her to meditate, and she was able to retrieve some of those messages that were given to her. And then she found peace because she remembered. But one of the things I really wanted to say is, I think that I don't know what to say the word obligation, but I will say it for me personally. It's my obligation to get it together and plan and prepare, and not put that burden on my children for any of what I've accumulated or whatever for my being in life as I exit this world. Yes.
That's a nice way of putting it. I think it's a very nice way of putting it. There's a certain level of personal responsibility that you're taking, and that I agree with. Personally, I look at it the same way. And I also look at it as, from an enjoyment standpoint, I was interviewed, you know, by I was interviewed by I went to Dartmouth College, and I was interviewed by the Alumni Magazine, and on my website you can read the interview. It's an interesting interview. She asked some very interesting questions. And one of the things I said was that, you know, I'm preparing myself for that point in time when I think the light's going to still be on, and if it is, I want to be completely aware and conscious about what happens so that I can enjoy whatever that is. I was also interviewed at Business Insider magazine after I gave a talk in San Francisco at the Commonwealth Club once, and he asked me an interesting question, the reporter did, and I said, you know, people talk about bucket lists. That's my bucket list. My bucket list starts after I die. So people have, you know, their bucket list before they die. I have a bucket list like after I die. This is my bucket list. I want to be like totally wide awake. I want to be completely conscious for whatever happens then until and if I get reborn again into another body. I want to be conscious, and then when I come back, I'll be completely aware. Now, I started having memories when I was 26 years old of other lives and stuff that, and languages that I don't know, and as Kelvin Chin doesn't know. But I want to be conscious for the whole duration of that, from the moment Kelvin Chin dies to the moment Kelvin Chin comes back or doesn't come back, into whatever. So, yeah.
Mr. Chin, I appreciate your presentation, very provocative. Also, I admire your courage in talking about a subject that, in this country, I don't think we do a very good job of. You know, we have all these nice euphemisms for passing on and moving on.
Right.
And he just died.
Right.
You know, it strikes me that fear is such a visceral, you know, reaction to stimuli, or, you know, it's either an organic thing that's hardwired into us, or it's a learned behavior that's very, very deep and almost autonomous in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder if I'm fully prepared to believe that through meditation and through your workshop, through your work, you can help alleviate or assuage some of the fears that people may have. I'm curious, though, that when the moment actually comes, to what extent this still maintains itself. I'm a veteran of 2 wars.
Yes.
And I know that at the point of death, many things change. And so I'm just curious about how.
Yeah, it's a great point. So the question is, you know, to what extent, when the moment actually does come, and you think you have overcome your fear of death, does it rear its ugly head, basically, right? Yeah, essentially. And I think it's a great point. Here's my thing. I'm a pragmatist. I'm a practical person. So I try to get people from point A to point B as close as possible. And if they get close to point B, that's close enough. And so how do I define that in terms of what we're talking about? I define that as not being overwhelmed by whatever the experience is. Because when we're overwhelmed by an experience, it doesn't matter. It could be getting married. It could be like a really happy thing. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be a negative thing all the time. But when we're overwhelmed, we can't fully experience. That's the bottom line. When and what I mean is, you know, our sense of self gets overwhelmed, and we all know what that feels like. So at the point of death, to your point, I want to get people to the point where, at that point, they're not overwhelmed, whatever that means for that person, and to whatever degree, because that's going to vary, so that they can experience it to whatever degree they can. There's no perfection here. Nobody's like perfect. It's like, wow, you know. But so there always may be a little vestige of some hanging on. That's okay, you know. And to your point of being through 2 wars, I commend you on that. And I have friends who have also, and I recently talked with an Iraq war vet. He and I became friends here in Austin, and he read my book, and he's been talking up my book with some of his Army vets friends. But he's been in 100 firefights. Think about that. 100. 100 firefights. You know what a firefight is? That's when it's machine guns, it's rapid fire, it's missiles, it's everything going off all around you, and you're in the middle of it. 100 of those. He saw so many of his friends die around him. 100 firefights. That's a crazy number, you know. And he
One
obviously-
firefight's crazy.
one firefight's enough, right? Yeah. And so when he and I talked about this, and you know, he'd read my book. We got together, and I'd never met him before. He read my book. He contacted me through my website, and we got together. We talked about this, and he said what helped him survive was that he had no fear of death. For whatever reason, he had come to terms with it before he was in Iraq. And if you talk to soldiers, and I'm watching Band of Brothers, which was like, 2001, which is an amazing show, series on HBO, but Second World War, but similar kind of thing. You know, I'm looking at it from the psycho-emotional as well standpoint. And they talk about, you know, one of the soldiers in one of the recent episodes said to one of the new recruits, he said, as soon as you get over this whole idea that you have to survive, you'll be fine, right?
Yeah, in the Marine Corps, they tell us.
Yeah.
Just think you consider yourself dead.
Exactly. But that's hard to do. That's hard to do, right? Easy to say, and hard to practice. But that's
my
key.
point.
That's key. Yeah, it's exactly your point. No, so my thing is, and I've worked in the Army, so I've taught meditation. I taught the first meditation courses ever in the U.S. Army. In Korea, I was on all the Army bases on the DMZ, the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. I was there 2 weeks after they found the first tunnel in November of 1974, and then they found another 3,000 troops an hour into South. We would have allowed if they hadn't found it. March 75, when I was there, 30,000 troops an hour, second tunnel. 30,000 troops an hour from North Korea into South Korea. Anyway, so I was teaching meditation there. I taught the first meditation courses ever at West Point, the first several courses there, the whole staff, the cadets, everybody. So the Army was looking at it from that standpoint. And I've recently contacted, anybody have any contacts at Fort Bragg? I mean, not Bragg, Fort Hood. I've just contacted a lieutenant colonel there to see about maybe helping out and teaching there. But yeah, it's critical, and it's about meditation. Sometimes I call meditation learning how to let go, because it's learning how to let go to what? Learning how to let go to yourself. But from our standpoint in the service that we're here engaged in today, it's learning how to let go to a larger sense of self.
Yes.
You might call it God, you might call it the universe, you would call it different things. You know, people define it in different ways. But, you know, certainly a larger sense of self than what I called earlier the supermarket aisles sense of self. You know, that's part of who we are, that's part of our minds, that's okay. But meditation is the learning how to let go to that. You learn how to let go to that, that breeds a sense of self-confidence and strength from the inside, so that whatever happens in the outside is going to happen. And then you almost surrender to living your life more fully in a good way. So it can increase the likelihood you're going to survive a firefight, is my point, right? In an interesting way. So, yeah.
Kelvin, we've gone a little over time,
Yeah.
but I want to thank you so much. Are you going to be here so you can visit with people a little bit?
Yeah, I'll visit with people. People have some more questions. I want to just end on one point about this afterlife and this whole structure of what happens in the afterlife, because I was talking with some people earlier about, you know, maybe some concerns and so forth. And I talk about it in my book here, how I view the structure of the afterlife based on talking with people and in my own experiences. I think there's a general structure to the afterlife. There's an objective general structure to it. For example, we don't have bodies in the same way that we have. So we don't have the need for food in the same way, and jobs and so forth in the same way. We can choose to have jobs, we can choose to do so forth, but it's a choice that we make in after the physical body dies and the mind. It's assuming the mind continues, because I believe that the mind continues. But but it's kind of shared. But there's a common experience, kind of very similar to like our shared experience of being awake here in the room together. We have a common shared objective experience. Kelvin Chin, Did he speak at the Baha'i Center? Yes, that's verifiable. That's a real fact. How anybody experienced what I said is completely unique. So that's completely subjective. So I think it's very similar to that. You know, we have objective experience on the other side that we could agree on. But how anybody experiences it or interprets it is unique to that person. So I say that because, you know, people will come back having an NDE and they'll say it this way, and other people say, well, no, I think it's this way. That's another variation of what I said that I try to get away from. You know, that's nitpicking a little thing. And that's not what's important. What's important is that, to your point, we make choice. We can make choices, and on the other side, we can make choices too. And so, it's not that our mind, all of a sudden, we lose our mind when we die. We still have our mind, our personality continues, we don't have our body in the same way. I think we still have a physical body in a different way, though. That's the thing that I like to point out to sometimes people, because people sometimes are fearful, like, well, am I just like a, you know, what does spirit mean and all that stuff? And my experience has been that I have seen bodies that some people wouldn't call bodies, but I think there's energy form there. And if there's an energy form there, that's a body. But we can call it an energy body or whatever, but it's a different body kind of a thing. So I say that to people because sometimes people are worried that, oh, am I going to see mom or dad, or going to see my brother again? And how will I know? Because they don't have bodies, I can't see them. Well, I think we know for a couple of reasons. One is that my experience has been, I've been shown a body sometimes, and then I recognize that form. And then after I recognize the form, I can have a mental experience, a telepathic mental experience with that mind, and I don't need to see the form anymore, because I recognize when they talk, or when the mind thinks in a certain way, etc. That it's recognizable, it's distinct, it's unique. And so I think all of that can possibly happen, you know. But anyway, it's very much, it's like driving through an intersection and somebody says, hey, you know, no, the intersection is like this, because they're the passenger and they're looking at the people on the sidewalk and what's in the windows of the store. And I'm driving and I say, no, the intersection is like this. There's a light, and it turned red, it turned green, and blah, 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 and then I gotta pay attention to that, and there's a car in front of me, that's the intersection, you know? But there's an objectivity to that, because there is an intersection, you know, but our experience of it is different, you know? Yes?
Maybe you can have folks stay and talk to you
Sure.
later that have questions?
Yes. So everybody wants to stay, please, I can stay as long as you want, and thank you for coming. So, by the way, I mentioned to her earlier that I'm selling the books for $10. You can turn it off. I'm selling books for $10 instead of, it's like $15.95 on Amazon, plus sales tax, plus shipping, and blah, blah.